All right, all right, all right, all right. Good evening, not afternoon. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to another installment of Your Money Matters Financial Empowerment Show. We've been gone for a minute. Now we're back. I won't finish the rest, but we had a whole month off due to some changes, making some adjustments and things of that nature. But we are back in full force. There's a lot of pressing things that are going on in our society, and we want to continue to empower people when it comes to money and finance. So we are back in full effect and ready to share with you. So again, I am Letha Thornton, your host. And today I wanted to bring in I'm gonna call him a strategist. He probably won't. Well, I think he'll accept that. But I wanted to bring in a strategist, somebody who I've kind of watched and admired over our time on being friends connected on social media. And I just saw some of the things that he was posting as it pertained to our communities, people in poverty, whether you're a person of color or not. But really just talking about some of the challenges and things that we face in our communities that stop us from advancing financially. So I'm going to introduce Mr. John Childress and have him to tell us a little bit about who he is and all that good stuff. So good evening.
Good evening. It's good to see you.
It is good to see you. I hope you're having an excellent night. Do me a favor and just kind of introduce yourself. Talk about some of your accolades, toot your own horn, if you will.
Sure, certainly. So I'll just keep it brief. I started off in business at a young age. When I was 21 years old, I moved to New York and opened up a Domino's pizza franchise and had that business for about 4 years. And then when I sold the store, I finished back at school and got my degree in finance from Rutgers University and came to Philadelphia to be the finance manager for student affairs at Temple University, and eventually became head of the African American Chamber of Commerce in Philadelphia, and met a lot of great people, did a lot of good work there, and then launched on my own to form Childress Business Consulting in 2007. And during this time since then, I have probably trained over 5,000 entrepreneurs in about 3 different states, 3 different countries, worked on a lot of economic development plans, and really worked with cities and states on how we can turn things around, because the struggle of this century isn't the civil rights struggle that our parents and grandparents fought for us in the last century. The struggle in this century is economics. So I'm so glad to be here today, and I'm so glad that you're doing this series. There's not many things more important than the financial education of our people.
That is the God's honest truth. I didn't know your resume was so extensive. I'm just excited to have you on, but I didn't know how much of an impact you have had when it came to economic development. And honestly, that's what myself and the good folks down at cmpradio.net, that has been such a huge focus, which is how this show came to be, because there are some things that are happening behind the scenes, and sometimes we miss it, or we're misinformed, or we're just not educated in certain areas to be able to make much of an impact. So I wanted to have you on as a co-host today, just to kind of feed off your energy, get
Mhm.
some wealth building strategies and things that our audience can actually latch on and grab hold to. Realistically, things were systematically designed for us not to understand, or not to take advantage of some of the things that were available to us. And we know that our people perish from a lack of knowledge.
Mhm.
So when you worked in communities and things like that, with economic empowerment and development, what did you identify as the key factors that were causing some of the decline in our
Sure.
community?
Certainly. Well, there's the systemic traditional factors such as underinvestment in schools in our communities and poor housing, things of that nature. And just to give you one quick snippet of the underinvestment in our communities, the way that the state of Pennsylvania and just about every state calculates how much money they spend per student is they look at the school budget and they divide that by the number of students. And they say, okay, we spend 12,000 per student or 10,000 per student. And I'll tell you how that harms us. We mostly go to schools in inner cities, in much older schools and older buildings, right? These
Right.
buildings cost 3 to 4 times as much to maintain as those nice new schools in the suburbs. So what happens is, if even though both schools may get $12,000 per student, in the inner city, they only get to spend 6,000 of that on our education because 6,000 has to go to repairing these old buildings. Whereas in the
Mm.
suburbs, they might spend 10,000 of that on education. So you're starting off at a disadvantage, right? And then if you're not educated, that really sets you back. And I'll give you an example of that. For 2 years, I had the honor of serving at the Philadelphia Anti-Violence, Anti-Drug Network called PAN. And they worked with adjudicated young adults, anywhere from age 17 to 24. And I got to teach them an entrepreneurship class, an economic development class. And what I found is those young minds are just as smart, just as bright as the young minds I was teaching on Wall Street in New York, exact same level. The difference was they did not have the formal training and education in those things. So what we do is our solution, you break things down in everyday language. When you do that, people understand the concepts. Just one class period, within 30 minutes, I taught this young man the stock market. And all I did was tell him the story of Dr. Dre, right? Start with someone they know, someone they can relate to. And I said, okay, remember Dr. Dre got kicked out of death row by Suge Knight with no money. He had nothing but the clothes on his back. He started his own record company. He made a little bit of money and he invested in Beats headphones. And at the time they were 250 million. And then by the time he sold it, it was $2 billion. And he owned 25% of that. So he got 500 million. So the young man said to me, goes, so Mr. John, if I want to get into the stock market, I should look for what's going to be popular in the future and buy it now. I said, that's it.
That's
I mean,
it.
that's the legal way to do it in the stock market, right?
That's
I
it.
mean, that is it. And he understood it. He got it within 30 minutes on how to move stocks, right? But the fact that no one beforehand was teaching him that, and he didn't know the language. So we have to get educated from that standpoint. And that's why I started with the schools and the educational system. So that leads us to a situation where we don't have the tools we need to acquire capital to make money in this country. And yeah, we call ourselves a democracy and a republic, but this is a capitalist nation. And if you don't have capital, you don't have a lot of rights in this nation.
Come on. Yes, indeed. And that is so huge. Like I was saying when we first started talking, it is not that we're not equipped. It's just that we don't have, when you put things in layman terms or terms that are, like you
Mhm.
said, relatable to individuals, that is really what, just the opportunity, like just opportunity is needed, and having people to teach those types of things. What was the outcome of that program? Like how did you, aside from teaching a young man the stock market, what was the underlying goal that you were trying to improve upon there?
Well, one, we were trying to make sure they had a financial education, something which should be standard in all of our schools. You know, who really cares what year Columbus sailed across the ocean blue? He wasn't even the first person here. You know, Africans were here hundreds of years before Columbus, right? So instead
Correct.
of teaching us these types of things, if you have limited resources for your school, teach the things that matter most. You know, teach the financial literacy and make that happen. And so the first step was teaching them that financial education and really moving them forward. The second was showing them how their skills could translate into job opportunities and entrepreneurship. And I know we placed at least a third of the students that came through there into jobs, which were long-term and sustainable jobs. And several of them we helped open businesses and grow small businesses. So when you look at for those results, that comes from people just putting the time in and working with folks. And the thing about it is, it's not like the other folks aren't doing that also.
Sure.
So one pet peeve of mine is when they try to make it like programs like this or some handout, right? No one gets more handouts from the United States government than the wealthy. No one. It's not even close. You might worry about you're getting a $500 check this month or a $1,000 check this month. They're getting a $100,000 check this month, you know? So
Yeah.
you look at it from that standpoint is we need to be able to teach our young adults and help them come along so they move forward. I also taught a class in Borough Park, Brooklyn for Orthodox Jewish males. And these men brought their sons age 12, 13, and 14 to this entrepreneurship class. And they weren't there to play around. They weren't playing on their, electronic toy or something during that time. They were taking notes so that by the time they were 18, they were skilled in how to make money in America. Imagine if we do that for our young adults. It really is a great thing. But also it shows them that there is another path.
Absolutely.
As you know, in cities like Philadelphia, Chicago, Detroit, there's been a continued outbreak of just terrible violence and what's going on. And people are like, stop the violence. Well, what are you going to give them otherwise?
Right.
I can't say stop the violence and not offer you a career.
Right.
It's a hollow statement. It becomes a powerful statement when you say stop the violence. I'm going to show you how to earn. I'm going to show you how to treat your sisters and brothers. Now we're saying something that's a little bit more significant. But see, that type of work can take years, maybe even a generation. And most people instead are looking for something which they can brag about in 6 months, right? It's just, life is not that simple. We got into this mess for 400 years. Ain't no few months going to get us out of that. But guess what? You and I and the folks who are listening, we can build paths to the future. We can lay the groundwork. My son always talks about this African proverb where he says a person is truly great when they plant a seed for a tree for which they will never sit in its shade. So you think about that, right? So instead of us saying, well, what can we do so I can walk around with some accolades on my back? No. It's so that my grandchildren and your grandchildren have a better day. And if we start doing that and develop that mentality, we'll make some serious changes here.
Dag, you just said like a whole mouthful. And I was taking some notes over here, just because you create talking points. But what's the answer for that? How does for people like myself, or even people like the platform that we're on, cmpradio.net, it's always putting on meaningful programming and looking to do things. How do we begin to start, since the schools aren't making it mandatory, although I do know that some schools now are starting to make progress in that area. How do we go about tackling putting more financial empowerment in the hands of people who don't have easy access?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because that goes to how do we solve the problem, right?
Absolutely.
And there are some outstanding people who are already doing it and folks don't know enough about. If there's the business center at New Covenant, which is up in Mount Airy, Pam Rich Wheeler's been there for many years, building some great work, teaching financial education to folks. There's a gentleman named Joel Wilson, who's also a member of 100 Black Men of Philadelphia. And he has an investment club and he does really great work teaching people about investments, So there's two things. One, we need to hold up the people that are already out here doing this so everyone knows the good work they do, right? Because we certainly hear about when we mess up. It's on the news, 3, 6, and 10, 6 o'clock, 11 o'clock, it's on there. How about instead we start holding them up? And then if there's gaps, that's where we need to put our energy to fill those gaps. So say if we have someone's teaching the young adults and someone's teaching, the 30s and 40s, who's working with the 20-year-olds, right? Well, we need to get somebody in there and fill that program and make that happen. So that's what I see as the key is finding people who are in need and bringing the education to them to help them improve what they're doing and understanding. And I'm sure you've taught people and talked to people, you don't win every race, right? Yeah. Some people, no matter how much you put there, they're not going to take what you're offering and succeed from it. But
Correct.
that's part of life, unfortunately. But many more will, right? And we can't stop just because one or two didn't totally feel the message enough that they could change their life, right?
Right.
So we have got to build up first is our education, and then we can start getting into the strategies.
Right. How do you fight against as we cast that vision?
Mhm.
And this is something that that's near and dear to me, just because I have teenagers growing up in
Mhm.
this consumerism. I gotta have it right now,
Yeah.
wearing my financial status on my body,
Mhm.
and things of that nature. How would you say, how do we tackle that part of it? Because I think it's that generation, like high school into, I would say, to age 25,
Mhm.
where they think they're going to live forever. They don't have to worry about these things right now, right? And in our communities often, if we don't look good,
Yeah.
we're broke, and that's something that I have a constant conversation with, with these teens of mine. But how do you combat that?
That that just may be the most difficult challenge that we face without
Yeah.
a doubt, right?
Yeah.
Because and to me it stems from a couple of things. One, it stems from the fact that many of us have given up on obtaining the high finance American dream, of being wealthy, of actually being wealthy. So the fallback is to try to show others that I'm wealthy by the clothes I wear, the car I drive, gold chains, whatever it is, right? It's something expensive. It's spending $600 for a pair of sneakers, right? Whatever it is, right? There's some status symbol that we strive to, and we have to be able to show them that you're actually hurting your ability to become financially secure. You are doing the exact opposite. And when you really start thinking about it, all of those things that we think symbolize wealth symbolize the opposite, right? And when you meet
Absolutely.
really some really well, there's some really wealthy people walking around town and you never know it because they're driving like a 1995 Toyota Camry and they're wearing just some regular old, no name sneakers. And you're thinking like, oh, that guy's a bum. This guy's worth like $10 million, $20 million, right?
Yes,
So we
indeed.
have to show them what real wealth really is, but also from the standpoint of showing them what happens when you're going for these material things. And once again, everyone won't get the message. But if we keep showing and showing, it's like the scales of justice. We have to put more on the side of reason and logic than they're getting from the streets or from music or whatever else is steering them wrong, right?
Right.
And the last thing I'll say about it is it's not one of those things that works well in mass, right? So we can't put like 60 people in a room and talk to them about how much, this kind of fake materialism is hurting them. It's not moving to financial security. It's much more you or me talking to some young adults on a one-on-one basis over a long period of time. That's what's so important about like 100 Black Men or Big Brothers Big Sisters, because you have to develop that relationship more so now with this generation than with previous generations. When I was raised, an adult told you something, you stop talking, listen, hear what they have to say, try to give it some merit. They're not trying to hear all that. And
Mhm.
because they see so many instances on the internet, IG, whatever, folks like, oh, she only 22 and look at her, she's balling out, she's doing this and this and this. And 9 out of 10 of those are fake. They're just faking it for the internet, right? You're
Yes.
struggling just like you and I. And we
Yes,
have to get that
indeed.
message to them.
Absolutely. And that is, you just said a whole mouthful, because it's almost like when you're teaching your children, it's like, the wealthy don't do that.
No,
Like
they really don't.
the wealthy don't do these things. The wealthy don't, spend crazy amounts on shoes and clothes and just things that, and I get it. Like I'll, when I talk about the history of certain things, we come from a time with our parents and grandparents where they weren't really allowed to own assets. They
Right.
weren't
Right.
really allowed to create wealth. If they weren't, passing that paper bag test, they weren't
Hmm.
permitted to do those things. So all we had was our looks, right?
Right. That's right.
So the Harlem Renaissance and all
Hmm.
those things, and you look back and you look at how great they looked, and Madam C.J. Walker came with how to care for ourselves and spend money on hair care and just different things. And I just feel like it's just passed down so much from generation to generation, and the wealth gap at this point, I believe African Americans are 250 years behind their white counterparts when it comes to growing wealth. And it's just such an uphill battle. And I think music does play, and I used to be one of those people like, don't blame music,
Right.
all of that stuff. I swear I was one of those people. But, as you watch it come into play, the way that they accumulated their wealth, that's not typical,
Right. Right.
so
Exactly.
you want to live that life or whatever, but you don't have those talents or
Hmm.
abilities, and then, like I said, you end up being in a situation where you're trying to wear your wealth, and
Yeah.
it's just it's very, very, very hard to watch. But I love the one-on-one conversations. And you mentioned 100 10,000, what was it,
100 black
10,000,
men. Sure.
100
Yeah.
black men.
Yep.
You mentioned them, and that was actually that was a group of people that I've been kind of like looking at, that I recently came across on IG. There are so many resources and things like that, and I think sometimes that might be a part of the problem, because people don't know where to go, they don't
Hmm.
know who to trust, they don't know who to listen to. So a consistent message and theme becomes extremely important. So if anything, I see you just putting information, I see you just posting information,
Yeah.
posting statistics, posting graphs and things like that. It gets no easier than those things that you post when we see a black household is negative $13,000 in create, with wealth
Yeah.
creation, and things like that. Hispanics aren't too far ahead of us, but
Right.
they are.
They are.
And then you have Asians, and then you have Caucasians. And I always say on my show, like, we love everybody. And I have people who will jump in my DMs and say, Letha, what you're doing to try to help your community is a really, really big deal. They There are some people that want to see us advance and things like that. But it's such a big fight. So one-on-one, the mentorship, I feel
Mhm.
like that's so it's lost in a lot of our communities, where people have given up on
Yeah.
young people, not wanting to show them, not wanting to teach them. A part of it is because of their abrasiveness.
Hmm.
Where I didn't come from that time. I didn't come from the time where somebody's trying to teach me something and I'm bucking back at them or not willing to take their advice. So um
But
that's huge.
yeah, it is. And you raised several good points in there. And I'll start with the last one first. And the last one really is the fact that, you know, a lot of folks want to try to help these young adults out and move them forward. But the moment they give that pushback, they're like, oh, he has an attitude, she has an attitude, I'm done. Right. But
Right.
that's when you're needed most.
Yes.
No one ever said it's going to be easy. And no
Mm-mm.
one said you're going to connect with everyone. The true test is if you stay in it when you get to those roadblocks, because they did not learn like you learned as a child. They weren't brought up the same way. So can you swallow your pride, swallow your ego, and say, you know what, let me come at this another way? Because it's not about me trying to force them to learn things my way, the way that we were raised or anything, or me try to help them my way, but help them in a way that's most effective. You
Sure.
have to think of all your actions and say, what outcome is it going to produce? And if
Right.
it's not going to produce the best outcome, but it makes me feel good to pound my chest. In my day, we didn't talk back to anyone. So what? It's not your day. There was a line in The Wire one time when Slim Charles said, that's the thing about the old days. They the old days, and that's just it.
Right.
So we have to, instead turn around and say, how do we make this happen? And then going back to something you said earlier, which is part of this, is that the music does have the influence, a much higher influence on our people than it does in other cultures.
Right.
Why? Because we don't have those supports that
No.
other cultures have,
Right.
and so we did have them and we let them go. So just think of the saying, it takes a village, but are we really giving them a village? Or are we just mouthing those words?
Right.
So it really takes a village means, I have child over here, Raheem. Okay, what am I doing with Raheem? Okay, I got 3 things I can teach him. Letha has 4 things she can teach him. Let me actually bring him to each one of these folks and make that happen, right? It's not about me. Doesn't mean I'm not a great parent or anything like that. It means the opposite. It means I care enough about this child to be successful. I'm willing to swallow my pride and come over to someone else and say, "Oh, she knows what's going on.
Right.
Let her talk to my child." Right? That's what it means when it takes a village, and you not to get offended by that, because
Right.
certain times you've been saying the same message over and over and over and over, and at some point it's in and out, right? In one ear, out the other ear. But
Right.
someone else comes in with a slightly different approach, and all of a sudden your kid comes back to you and say, "Hey, Dad, did you know that blah blah blah?" And you're just like,
Oh.
that was exactly what I said. But
Right.
true village is saying, how can we help in the ways that are going to be most effective? Not just the ways that I was trained or the way that I was raised or anything along those lines, but what is really going to achieve the best result for them. So, I mean, you just hit on so many really good points, because, and what it tells me is that you are true of heart in terms of your mission and what you were doing, right? Because the people who are not, and they're easy to spot because they brag about their accomplishments.
Right.
Oh, I talked to this many young adults and I did this and this. But the ones who are really about it, they talk about what their students or young adults, what they were able to do, right?
Sure.
And they don't catch this attitude. And the last thing I'll put on this was about 15 years ago, there was this thing that was held in Philadelphia called the 10,000 Man March at the Liacouras Center. It was kind of like Philly's version of the Million Man
I
March, right?
remember. Yeah.
And it was going okay. And then we had this session with these young adults, and Mr. Cosby came in. Now, I don't want to take anything away from all of his success and his career and the things that he's done,
Sure.
right? But
Right.
on this day and at that time, he wasn't the right person with the right approach,
His
because he just
message
started
was a little
berating
jacked
them
up.
because of the way
Yeah.
they dressed and
Yep.
this and that. Half of those young men got up and walked out the door while he was speaking.
Absolutely.
So what good did you achieve, right? You stuck your chest out there, but you didn't influence in a positive manner the young men and women that you were trying to reach.
Yeah.
So,
And that's the
that's what I
part.
try to do.
Yeah, you gotta you with that particular. We all could see where he was going.
Mhm.
And he probably thought that he had enough credibility to kind of come at
Yeah.
people. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
that comes with building a rapport.
Right.
And like you said, the personal rapport, not the
Exactly.
honestly. Bill Cosby is probably the reason I attended a HBCU.
Mhm.
For a lot of us, you know what I mean. He
Yeah.
paved that way to show us that we can have pride in
Mhm.
our colleges and universities and things like that. But at the same time, that for people who came to hear that message, he could have done a lot of good if
Right.
he would have built them up first.
Yep.
Did
Yep.
some
Exactly.
uplift, and maybe a sandwich compliment like, I'm so
Yeah.
glad y'all are here. However, we got some things that we need to attack, and really that's kind of the dialogue and thing that I wanted to have with you. Like, we have made a lot of advances in a
Mhm.
lot of different ways, but let if someone can come to you with love, and like you said, the passion is there for both of us. You know what I mean? If someone can
Mhm.
come with you with love, I don't care who it is.
Right.
Someone might hear something from you that I've been saying on every single show. I don't really
Mhm.
care, as long as you get it. And he had a platform, and at that time probably could have done some amazing things if he would have put that love into it. And maybe he just didn't maybe he didn't know the best approach, or maybe he thought it would be received differently, and it was not.
Yeah,
So I was definitely disappointed with that, because he did have the influence. You know what I mean?
he did.
He had the
He did.
backing for it.
Yeah,
So,
and he wanted to
um,
do it, but you nailed it. It was the fact that he came in wanting to do it his way without establishing the rapport first, right?
yeah,
First, with especially with this generation, they need to know that you'll go through a wall for them first before you
yep,
can give them any advice, right?
absolutely,
You can't, and the other thing is you have to really temper the negative comments that you give to them. It's
right.
not the old Marine drill sergeant mentality anymore where the adult just blasts you
No,
and blasts you and you're like, yes, sir, yes, sir. No, they're not having that. So you better
no.
start with the positive, like you said, and really build that rapport and that positive energy. And that keeps you grounded also, right? Because if you really think
Absolutely.
about it, we weren't perfect as teenagers.
No, no.
Not in the
I
slightest.
struggle definitely with that.
Right.
You know, because you just can't help it. Like, back in my day, like this just isn't what we did,
Yeah,
and like you said, it's not your day anymore,
that's right.
and that struggle to connect and have that relationship is so critical when you have their ear, not
Yep.
just them but their parents, because
Hmm.
a lot of the times you're educating the child because the parent didn't have the information or the resources to educate the child. So, we're on our third or fourth generation
Yeah.
of people who, kind of miss that part of the education. So,
They, yeah.
attacking it, from all different age groups, I think is a really big one. But if we could shape though that I'd say that high school to age 25,
Hmm.
you'll then have the generations behind it coming in with a different type of mindset. And that's why, I try so hard with younger people, and they do have to know,
Yeah.
what I mean, that you're willing to, like you said, go through a wall with them, and then they're willing to listen, and you can teach them some things. So, I'm always thinking like, what could we possibly do? Like, how can
Right.
we do this? How to not oversaturate it? And that's what it seems like sometimes. Financial literacy and empowerment can seem oversaturated because you do
Hmm.
have the people who are, doing it for the marketing or the publicity, and then
Yeah.
you have the people who are behind the scenes kind of working, and trying to get some things done, and sometimes it becomes a little bit blurred with people's intentions. So, that's huge, for me, just to bounce ideas. I just want to be able to
Mhm.
bounce ideas off of people, like, what is it that we can do? And like you said, okay, this person over here does this person over here
Yeah.
does that, and everything doesn't have to be an ebook. Like, that's something
Right.
else that I've been something else I've been seeing, like, oh, you want this information, you got to pay for it. And it's just like, that's a part of the problem. American Express will do a financial game plan for you, but you got to pay for it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And
No question.
sometimes it's not affordable. And if you're like me, sometimes you can get discouraged with information overload. So it
Hmm.
has to be it we have to take baby steps to correct it. It didn't take If it took 250 years or 400 years for us to fall behind, it's not going to happen in the 6 months,
No.
that you were talking about. So, this won't be the last conversation. We sporadically have people
Hmm.
coming on, talking about, solutions and things like that. What do you think? Um, what do you think our struggles are when it comes to, building up, our communities? We've seen like multiple, buy black campaigns, or just different things where, whether it was a boycott, we're not going to do this, we're not going to do
Hmm.
that. I hear, people talking about, blacks getting out of Florida because of, I won't even name his name.
Sure. I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, everybody knows what I'm talking about, because he makes it scary to go to Florida. But why do you think where do you think the struggles lie when it comes to, building up our communities, buying black, the economic empowerment. We know certain things play a part, but why do we have that struggle so much?
Whew, oh my goodness, there's so much in there. We could spend an hour on that, right? But I think first off, it starts with something the former chair of the African American Chamber of Commerce, Bruce Crawley, told me when I first started as executive director. He said, "Our people feel like the white man's ice is colder," right? So if
Mm,
you start from a position of mental inferiority where you think someone is inherently better than you, not that they've achieved more or that they're in a better position, but they're fundamentally better than you, that's a
sure.
problem that's very hard to overcome. So
Of
that's number one. Number
course.
two, we almost got spoiled by the generation of great leaders, right? So
Mm,
we had an A. Philip Randolph and Angela Davis and Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. I mean, it's just the list goes on,
right.
you know. And so the problem though is they were exceptional people for exceptional times.
Right.
So if we're building our strategies based on finding the next Martin or Malcolm or Maya or someone like that, it's not happening.
Absolutely.
So one of the big things what I advocate for is instead we should be focused on building approaches of success and teaching those to our young adults. All of us can teach these principles of success. It doesn't take, a theological degree. It doesn't take, 25 years on the street. It doesn't take any of that, right? And it's not reliant upon one leader or one organization.
Sure.
See, even if you think of like Black Lives Matter, a couple of years ago, there were millions of people across America protesting. Now there's no one. It's like it vanished overnight because they were relying
Yeah.
on an organization and the people leading that organization to change things instead of relying on ourselves to apply the best principles in there and to make that happen. So our community organizational efforts fail because we're waiting for that great leader. We get someone who's not, we're disappointed by that person and it all falls apart. Or it's on an organization and the organization after a while exists for itself. They
Yeah.
exist. If you look at the national Black organizations, what are they doing now? What was the last major national topic that NAACP tackled successfully and got done? They can't because now they're a bureaucracy that needs the corporate dollars in order to pay their bills. And
Mm,
so, if you need the corporate dollars to pay your bills, you're never going to give an independent voice. You're never going to bring about change because the corporations are happy with the things that they are. And if you
of
try to
course.
get to speak up against them, oh no, they'll pull our funding. We have to be quiet here, right? So real community movement must be self-funded because if it's funded by
Mm,
the people you're protesting, they shut you down immediately.
right.
And then the last thing I'll say, and there were a few more, but I'll just stop with this one, is that, each one of us has to know when it's our time to pass the torch.
Mm,
And this is really true in the Philadelphia area where there are leaders of organizations that have been there 30 or 40 years. That's too long. You're stale. You might not think you're stale. You're stale. You are not getting to the needs of the people on the street. And worse than that, you made it about yourself. Because after 10 years, you should have groomed someone to take over and take the reins and run this thing and make it happen. And then they should groom someone to take it and run with it, right? Instead of you looking at it as a lifetime job, you know?
absolutely.
And then the last thing, the very last thing I will say is because we must change our focus in our mindset. So the things that we think are signs of success are not. We need to
Right.
go straight to the measurements, the measurables, right? How many people are unemployed? How many people are under the poverty line? How many
Mm,
people don't have a good home or food on their table or clothes on their back, right? And have we reduced that? Because if we haven't done a thing. And I've talked to a lot of people about this and they get mad at me. How can you say they haven't done anything? And shame on you. And you must be for Trump and you're this and this. I said, no, I'm for
no.
results. And if you're not
Right.
results, I don't give a darn if you're the NAACP, you're this reverend, you're this person or that person, you're not getting the job done. And we have to have the courage to speak out and say that, and say that there's the same ghettos. And the thing that summed it up, I think one thing I posted you might have saw is that in 1968, the
Right.
average white family held 11 times the worth of the average black family. In 2023, it's the same. 55 years have passed since Martin Luther King was assassinated. We have not moved the needle one bit. So my basic thesis is we failed for half a century. And people don't want to hear that
Yep.
because they get distracted by outliers like Jay-Z or Beyonce or Barack Obama. They're outliers. Most Black people that aren't in the top 25% of Blacks who are earning money have either stayed the same or lost ground over the last 50 years.
Yep.
And until we start dealing with the facts of the situation, we'll be able to pat people on the back when they're not doing anything. You know, and that's what we're missing right now is we are missing that who's holding us accountable for producing real change. And then we're going to look at the young kids and say, oh, they're just shooting, they're acting up, they're doing this because we failed them.
Yes.
We didn't get our job done, or we wouldn't have to be saying that. So that's what I think really are the challenges for the community organizing and bringing about. Let's start with how can we move the needle?
Right. How can we move the needle? You know, and when it comes to, you know, Black owned businesses and things like that, the accountability on both ends, you know,
Yeah.
where we won't necessarily shop, you know, with people that look like us for whatever preconceived notions we have.
Yeah.
Oh, the service is going to be bad, or they're going to be ghetto, or they're going to be
Mhm.
rude, you know. And then you come across a Black owned business who feels like they have to overcompensate
Right.
to
Right.
try to, you know, show that they're not these things. Is so many times that things are just unfair, you
Yeah.
know, where you're not necessarily willing to give it a chance, give a Black owned business a chance, because like you said, you know what I mean, I believe I'm going to receive superior service
Yes.
when I go to a different establishment. And for us Black business owners, we got to take some personal accountability. What is the experience when someone comes to shop with you? Are you organized? Are you prepared? Are you, you know, are you exhibiting you know,
Yeah.
supreme customer service? You know, just different things that, you know, really stop us from coming together. We've tried gas boycotts, we've tried,
Mhm.
you know, every possible thing. And, you know, I do think we're scattered in so many different directions that sometimes it's hard to see a clear path. The continued education and the continued mentoring and outreach is critical to change some lives. You know,
Right.
we know
Right.
we're not gonna reach everybody, but
Yeah.
a
That's
child
right.
might be able to reach a parent that they couldn't reach before, you know, that someone else couldn't reach, you know, because their child's learning this or their child's learning that. So while you feel so hopeful, sometimes when I'm thinking real hard, you feel hopeless. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? Because it's so there's so many different generational curses, whether it's us passing poverty,
Mhm.
you know, just the violence, you know,
Yeah.
where you stack people on top of each other in our communities and expect them
Mhm.
to be okay. You know, I remember when they closed down all the rec centers. I
That's right.
remember when they, you know, they're trying to open the pools back up. I remember, you know, all of those things, taking the funding, taking the outlets, taking, you know, boys and girls clubs and different things that were doing some things, police athletic league, you
Mhm.
know, all of that stuff you have seen really diminish, whether it's lack of funding or, you know, whatever the case may be. And those are the things that sometimes make you feel like, dang, I don't see any end in sight. Like I'm gonna just move to Mars. Like
Yeah.
you know, like just
Yeah.
feeling like, you know, you don't belong in a society that is, you know, seems to be moving away from the things that you really would like to see for yourself, for your community, for your children, your grandchildren, and all of those different things. Um, how do you feel about when it comes to building wealth? A topic that's always very near and dear to me when I'm talking with people about breaking generational curses, not continuing to pass poverty. How do you feel about life insurance in the Black community?
Oh, it's critical. It is absolutely critical because that's the only thing guaranteed in this world is that we will pass. My grandmama had a saying. She said, "Everyone wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die."
Right,
Right?
right,
And just think of the millions and billions of dollars and trillions, if you talk about over decades of dollars lost by our families not having life insurance. You know, what's the Temptations' most famous song? Papa was a rolling stone. All he left us was alone. You know, and there's truth to that. Those words rang home because it was the truth. Most of us, when our parents or grandparents die, we don't get that wealth because we don't have insurance. You know, if we don't have, you know, the two things where most of that wealth is passed is either insurance or home ownership. And on the insurance side, we're lacking greatly there. So you're not getting that insurance. And then on the home ownership side, either we don't own homes or we own homes in communities that don't appreciate, right? So it's not gaining that value. I mean, how many studies do we have to see where, well, the home in the Black community and how little it's valued for the exact same home built by the same builder in a white community, you know, valued at 40% higher, 30% higher. That's all money stolen from our children. That is all appreciation that's stolen from our children. That one is society inflicting on us. Us not getting insurance is us inflicting on it, right? So that's the other thing. We have to take account of the things that we're not doing right. You know, everything's not about racism or oppression or lack of opportunity. Sometimes it's us not doing common sense stuff like having insurance. You know,
and it might have started at that point where you know it was forced upon us and we weren't able to do blah blah blah. But now we just don't have any excuse.
No.
You know, when it comes to those types of things, we just don't. Like, people will say, oh, I can't afford it. But you got the latest this, you got the latest that, you know, just different
choices.
Things, you know, insuring our cell phones, insuring our cars, insuring our body parts, you know, insuring, you know, electronics and things like that. But we won't spend, you know, under $100 to, you know, create wealth. It's not just about getting the person in the ground. It's about, what are you leaving behind? If you made $50,000 and you got 3 young children, how do they keep up that same standard of living if your paycheck died with you? You know, so I saw this thing. It was a video I saw, and I want your thoughts on it. It said if every Black person had a $250,000 life insurance policy or more, it would end a lot of the unfair injustice when it comes to even shootings of unarmed Black people by the police. And it basically said, because insurance companies don't want to have to pay, and if we all got policies, right, they somebody's gonna be like, all right, wait, but if we don't have policies, then, you know, nobody really has to pay anything, and we could just say, oh, another hashtag, you know, RIP, or, you know, different things. We don't fight with our money. You know, there are some ways that we can fight and do some things with our money and our input, you know, and we just don't, you know, and it looks bad. We got rappers, no life insurance. We got, you know, we have people who, you know, make good money and say they love their family and they love their children. You know, a wise man, Proverbs says, a wise man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. And we're kind of dropping the ball in that area, whether it's home ownership, like you said, or whether it's the life insurance part of it. You know, there are some things that are rather easy to do, and we just aren't doing it. So what are your thoughts on some of those things?
Some more really good points that you raised. I mean, one of them is kind of the core essence of this nation and most of what is called the Western world, from that term, right? But when you look at it from this standpoint, capital runs this country, period. Almost all of the civil rights protests that were successful really were economic protests. It was never really about civil rights. It was only when you can hit them in the pocketbook does it matter. And you can best believe if these extra murders that were happening to us was causing billions of dollars in payments to be paid out, those same corporations would be right there at Congress saying, hey, you got to do something about this. We're not going to keep losing money and paying this out, because we see it happen even in other countries. If a U.S. corporation has plants in another country and there's a civil war, they will send in whatever they have to stop that so that company can still make money. That's what
Yep.
it's about. I mean, that is
Yep.
the essence of this nation, and everything else is, sometimes just window dressing when you look at it from that standpoint, right? So
Yes.
you've got to be able to hit them in the wallet. It's the only area that really counts, right? So if you're putting it together from that standpoint, yes, you'll be successful. You'll scare them with that. Everything else, they don't care about any protesters. They're going to drive around
No.
you, step over you. They'll
No.
let you protest for a few weeks, then the police will break it up. And, no. But if there was a financial cost to pay, oh, you better believe actions will change. And
Yep.
in the same way that you talked about, if we amass capital, we're not going to be yanked out of cars and shot and this, that, or the other thing. It's not going to happen. You don't see that happening.
No.
You don't see that happening to other groups who have amassed capital. And one thing I want to say about that is we should learn from the other groups instead of always criticizing them and try to divide the nation and saying this and say, for a
Yeah.
while there became fashionable in our community to attack Jewish Americans, right? Well, why? They weren't
Right.
the only ones who benefited from slave trade or this, that. Protestants were doing it. Catholics were doing it. Muslims were doing it, right? Everybody was doing it. So let's separate that out, number one. Number two, they've given us a model to follow. You can't tell me who the great Jewish American leader is. You can't. But you can watch how in 100 years they went from almost as poor as blacks to some of the wealthiest people in the country. And that's not a knock on them. I'm saying emulate that. Right? Look at the strategies. We don't like the message that's being told about us. Come on, do like Oprah and Tyler Perry, buy media companies so that we can control the message going out. And now with things on the internet, there's no excuse for us not controlling our message, right? So we have to be able to take charge of these things. And there's nothing more important in this nation than capital. And what's so funny is if you hear me talking this stuff, you would think that I was someone who was materialistic. Nope. Not at all. No, but I want to make sure my children and their children are taken care of and have a foundation to build upon. I don't want them to start as ground zero as I did. And my parents were very smart, very gifted people, but they left me, brains and motivation, no
Right.
house, none of that stuff or anything like that,
Me too.
So, but, and I wouldn't trade them for anyone in the world. Right. But at the same time, when I'm teaching in Brooklyn and I'm teaching to the Orthodox Jewish young men and stuff, and they're just like, oh yeah, my uncle can write a check for $500,000 to fund my business. And I'm just like, do we have an uncle that can write a check for $5,000 for us?
Right.
You're like, whoa, wait a minute, right? But we can be that uncle if we start building that up and making these things happen, right? So we have to start looking at what are these strategies which will actually generate generational wealth and changing our mindsets from generational poverty, where all we can do is just show off our latest outfit as something that shows something. It's just, I remember when I went to my 10th year high school anniversary, a lot of these brothers I went to high school with, they were sporting these like S-Class Mercedes Benz, like, oh, check out my ride while I'm driving in my Ford, right? Well, they were sporting their S-Class Mercedes Benz while still living with their mama.
Yep. That's another one.
Yeah, so you just dropped $100,000 on a car that could have been a condo that could have turned into something else. I bought my first house as a fixer-upper. It was a foreclosure for like $97,000 and then sold it for $170,000. Then you buy the next house for $370,000. Now it's worth $600,000. That's how you can build over time. It's not fast. It doesn't happen in IG time. It doesn't happen in Twitter time.
No.
It happens in lifetimes, right? And that's the thing that we got to understand.
That is the honest truth right there. And we do have to understand that microwave success just isn't attainable. That's not typical. They say results are not typical.
Right.
It's the truth. Results are definitely not typical. You are dropping some like part B, C, D, E, and F shows for later. So we're definitely gonna have you come back. But talk about But before we close out, talk about the importance of entrepreneurship as it pertains to building and strengthening our communities.
Everything has come full circle. So if you go back to like our grandparents and great grandparents generation, we were not allowed to, to patronize white businesses, right? So the
Right.
result of that is a Madam C.J. Walker. The result of that are some of the great Black titans of the early 1900s. They were all business people, and they
Sure.
made a ton of money, right? Off of our people, not in a negative way, in a positive way, because
Right.
we were patronizing Black, because we didn't have a choice, right?
Right.
And we knew the folks, and a lot of Blacks became wealthy because of that. And then came the integration generation, which is like my parents' generation. They were the first. My dad was the first Black designer for NASA, working on the Apollo, space program. My mother
Mhm.
got her, PhD while raising 6 kids. I mean, they just did all. They were like that integration coming in there. But guess what happened? That failed after like 40 or so years, 50 years, because the company started laying off. They started outsourcing jobs overseas, right?
Right.
And we were the last in and the first out, right? So
Right.
those jobs weren't there. So then we say, well, where do we have to go? We didn't get the education to take advantage of the IT and tech world right now. The blue collar jobs aren't there anymore. The farming jobs aren't there anymore. So how are we going to survive, right? Well, we
Right.
have to go back to entrepreneurship, which was where we started, in this country. Anyone who had wealth was Black was an entrepreneur back in the day, right? Well, we have to go back to it, but do it in a different way. It's not, oh, I'm going to make business and only sell to Black people. No, I'm going where the money is. As the famous bank robber said, why do you rob banks? He said, because that's where the money is, right?
Right.
And that's where we need to go with our businesses. And something you mentioned earlier, which is dead on point, which is our businesses should set a standard to be better than the other businesses. Not as good, but better. We have to overcome. We have to be better. We have to set that standard, right? And there's this thing which I call the sin of the individual is cast upon the many, right? So that
Mhm.
means I own a Black business. If you come to me and I mess up, you're like, oh, I ain't going to no more brothers.
That's
I'm going
just
to
why I
go over
don't
this
shop
guy.
with them.
That's right. That's right. Yet, if you go to an Italian restaurant and the food's no good, you're not writing off all Italian restaurants.
No.
No, not
You're
at
gonna try
all.
another one. Yep.
Exactly. Exactly. So until we get to that status, right, we do have to try harder. Stop telling our kids, I'm going to make it a level playing field. I'm going to make things fair. It's never going to be fair in our lifetime.
Never gonna be
It's never
fair.
going to be level. Let's give them that lesson and say, okay, now that it's not level, what are you going to do? Because all of the greats that we
Absolutely.
mentioned, you think they had a level playing field? Not even
Not
close.
even close.
Not even
No.
close, right? And here's the analogy I use, because I used to run track a lot, is that you're starting off at the hurdles, the 100-meter hurdles, right? And you look up and you see that your hurdles are this high and your opponents are this high. What are
Right.
you going to do? Are you going to quit the race because it's not fair? Are you going to cry about your high hurdles so much that they smoke you and they win the race and you lose? Or you're complaining while you're running, you trip and fall, because that's what you do when you're hurdling if you're not paying attention.
Right.
Or you can train so hard and so strong and fast that you jump over this high hurdle faster than they can do the low hurdle. And if you
Right.
do that for enough races, sooner or later, you're going to get to that start line and see you're the one with the low hurdles. And my example of that is Oprah Winfrey, right? Do you think when she first said, I'm going to be this multimedia mogul, Black woman, blah, 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 what were the odds against that happening against her, right? You think she had high hurdles, And she kept doing it and she kept doing it until it got to the point where she was the one with the low hurdles, meaning when you saw that O approved on something, it was worth millions.
Everybody wanted it, and you're
Everybody.
absolutely right. That was at a
Exactly.
time where there were no Black TV show hosts during that
That's
time
right.
of day. Yeah,
Exactly.
you're right.
Exactly.
That
So
was a high hurdle.
yeah, we teach the success of Oprah being a billionaire. We need to teach the 20 years she struggled before she got to be a household name, and how she
Yes.
stuck with it and went through that. And that story goes for almost every single one of us who you see that is successful. This generation and our people, and even us today, we have a tendency to just focus on the awards. Look at them. They're this, and this. They didn't start that way. They went through the grill to get there, So let's teach that and make that happen.
I love it. You just said another mouthful, and we are at our hour, so I definitely am going to have you come back, because
Sounds good.
um, we definitely did the chapters, but we kind of didn't open each each chapter to kind of dive into some things, but the economic empowerment and the teaching and those the fundamentals and
Sure.
the groundwork and all of that stuff is just so important. If anybody wanted to pick your brain, how could they get a hold of you?
Sure. You can go to my website, which is www.childressbiz.com. You can reach me at jtchildress@gmail, which is another really good way to reach me. I love helping anyone. I get back to people usually within 24 hours. So yeah, please, you can reach out to me anytime and I'll do my best. And listen, the answer might not come from me. It might be someone who I know, because I know thousands of folks that are entrepreneurs and teachers and things of that nature. So I will connect you with the person who can help you.
Absolutely. And it, practicing what you preach. Like, it may not be me,
That's right.
but I can put you in the direction. And I think that that's something else that's lacking. We don't refer. We don't
Right. Exactly.
point our people in the direction because we feel like it's going to take something from us.
Nope.
If we point people in the right direction. So I love that you said that. There's enough room out here for all of us to do well, all of us to eat, all of us to
Yep.
be successful, and the crab in the barrel mentality in our communities continue to put us at a loss. So
Without a doubt.
yeah,
Yeah,
so
without a doubt. That's got to go.
it's gotta go.
Working together and making it happen is definitely the way to go forward.
Absolutely. So I am going to bid you a really, really good night, but I cannot thank
Thank you
you
for having me.
enough. I honestly, you know, these conversations, sometimes like this wasn't necessarily scripted. We didn't
Mhm.
practice this, we didn't rehearse it,
Right.
and to be able to feed off of each other's energy and really have a passion to educate and teach. I'm just humbled and extremely thankful that you joined us and shed some light on just a few of the areas. Like you said, we could probably go on and on and
Oh
on.
yeah, we can certainly.
We could go on and on and on, but I just thank you for taking some of your time out of your evening to spend with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. It's been an honor to be here.
Yes, indeed. So that concludes this episode of Your Money Matters Financial Empowerment Show. Next week, we will have our entrepreneur spotlight on, where we will be showcasing, as we talked about just now, the importance of entrepreneurship, the hurdles, the joys, and all of those things. We will have an entrepreneur spotlight. If you have a business that you would like to showcase on Your Money Matters, it could be locally, it could be out of state, whatever the case may be. If you have the resources to offer your services across the country or whatever the case may be, you can on Facebook, we have Your Money Matters Financial Empowerment Show group. You certainly can reach out that way, to showcase your business, and we can get you on the next show. So that is it for me. I thank you all for tuning in, and I hope that we continue to put on programming that really, really matters and is helpful to you. The resources that we are providing are free. And I say it almost every show. Please take advantage of these things. We're not in the lack of information age anymore. We are in the information age, and people are tossing this information for you to catch. And I just hope and pray that we said something tonight that was impactful in your world. So I bid you all a good night. Thank you.
CMPRadio.net, it's the station. Listen, man, let's cultivate together. Bring us all your show ideas. Content creators, we're looking for that. Videographers, we're looking for that. You can be a part of the next great big thing that takes place right here in Chester, Pennsylvania.